Welcome everyone to session 2 of Macdonald Company's webinar series looking at the long-term impacts of COVID-19 and our second panelist group of looking at the impacts on residential development. I'll start by saying thank you very much to Macdonald Company for giving us the opportunity to bring the panel together and enabling us to use the platform. And I'll very briefly introduce these guys, and then I'll shut up and let them introduce themselves, because I know that's what you've tuned in to hear for. So I will start then with Sue, who's the newly elected president of the RTPI, moving to Rozanna Lawes, who's executive director of development for LLDC, Matt Townend, who's chief operating officer for EcoWorld London, and Pierre Melhado, who's the head of residential. I stumbled here, Pierre. Is head of residential for CA Ventures. I've got that title correct?
Yeah, pretty close. BTR across Europe. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, Sue, I'll ask you to start. Would you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Right, thank you. Well, I'm Sue Mann, and as Nicholas said, I'm president of the RTPI for 2020. We'll be honest, it's not quite the year I'd envisaged, but it's still a very, very exciting year in the way we adapt going forward. I've got a background of 40 years in planning, public sector, private sector, voluntary sector, national, regional and local levels. So hopefully be able to contribute to the discussion.
Oh, no doubt. And Rozanna, would you go next, please?
Of course. Hi, everybody. I'm Rozanna Lawes. I'm the Executive Director of Development at LLDC. We're a development corporation. We're a functional body of the Mayor. So our remit and responsibility is transforming the Olympic Park into a new piece of city, a new piece of London.
And Matt, would you go next, please?
Hi there, my name's Matt Townend. I am the Chief Operating Officer at EcoWorld London. We are a joint venture between EcoWorld and Wilmot Dixon, focusing very much on London. And my personal background, I spent quite a lot of time at the Berkeley Group and at Battersea Power Station, and I've always worked in the world of, well, pretty much always worked in the world of residential development.
And Pierre, would you give us a strong end to this, please?
I'll try. Tough crowd to follow. Managing Director of BTR Operations for UK and Europe for CA Ventures. We're a globally integrated real estate development and management firm. About 13 billion in assets. We recently opened our office in the UK about a year and a half ago. And we also have a management arm where we offer third-party management to developers and those that don't have the expertise in-house. I'm very excited to be in the UK.
Well, we're glad to have you with us today as well, Pierre. So I'll start off with just a little bit of housekeeping. So to everyone in the audience, and I assume it's also set up in the same way it's set up on my screen, on your right-hand side, you will have 3 tabs. There is a chat section. This is where feel free to chat about Dominic Cummings if you're not bored of that already. Say hello, give us any sort of feedback on the conversation so far. The Q&A tab here, this is the one I find the most interesting. This is where I want you guys to put your questions to our panel. And the crucial bit for this, and particularly for me in particular, is monitoring this, is that you've got the option there for voting up other people's questions. If there's a question there you particularly like the look of, click the upvote option. And that way then, during this conversation, I can see the questions that our audience are most interested. I'll return back then to our panelists, and I'll ask the questions of... I'm going to go pick on Sue first, if I can. And this comes from Mike Craddock, who's from Brearley Homes, a senior development manager there. And he asks, what role do you think the planning system has to play in the recovery post-COVID-19? So what role do you think the planning system has to play in the recovery post-COVID-19? Sue, would you mind kicking off on that?
Right, well, thank you very much for the question, first off. I think there is little doubt that the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic are going to bring about a lot of changes to our lives, but also to the places and spaces where we live and work. Some of those changes are going to be challenging, and others may be seen and welcomed as positive and long overdue. But if you look back in history, the role and importance of planning as being central to a recovery from public health crises is not new. Looking back in history, our towns and our cities have been shaped by our responses to public health crises. In London, the cholera epidemic of the 20th century brought about an understanding of the need for the provision of clean water supplies and sewage systems. And that infrastructure that went in there then is now serving us today and impacts on how we use our cities today. So ensuring better housing conditions for workers, that was actually a key driver in the 1909 Town Planning Act that banned the building of back-to-back houses, and it allowed local authorities to prepare schemes of town planning. So two parts to the answer, a bit of background, but two parts going forward. There's the short-term bit. The short-term focus of our response to the pandemic has been to ensure that the planning system carries on functioning through this particularly difficult period. And last week, the RTPI published a report which is called Pragmatic and Prepared for Recovery. And that identified a series of short-term issues that needed to be addressed by government. But looking forward, there's another report coming out from the RTPI next week that will actually start to address some of those challenges going forward. And I think one of the key things that we need to remember is that in our haste to return to normality, because I think now we've got to the point where everyone is craving to get back to something that resembled the life that we used to enjoy. But in doing that, we mustn't lose sight of the lessons that we've learned from the pandemic, lessons about the way we live, the way we work, the way we use our homes, the way we use our places and spaces. And we've all started to experience that on a local level in a way perhaps that we didn't before. But equally, we need to think about who we're planning for and take the time to build an understanding of what individuals and communities want to see out of their places and spaces going forward. So planning is well placed to lead that debate. We get community engagement, and there's some tremendous examples of good engagement out there. We need to reach out and get those diverse views. We need to then balance the competing pressures and to develop plans that help guide us all going forward. And if anything, the COVID-19 crisis has given added emphasis to the importance of investing in the future. So just to wind up, while the pandemic has reinforced the legitimacy of public investment in health and social care, we need to extend that to include homes that we build and the spaces and places that we live in and surround them. And that also means investing in the planning system, ensuring that planners are properly resourced and that they're there at the top table when this happens. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sue. So I'll ask Matt just to get your thoughts on this. Sue and I were joking before we went live that if this panel was full of house builders, you know, she'd be picked on as the reason why they can't build the homes they want to build. What's your view as from a private development perspective?
I think the challenge is going to come as much. Planning, in my experience, is sort of twofold. There's the policy bit, but then there's also the influence of the politicians. And it's going to be interesting to see how the politicians change their approach to the planning process. Because if we do want to get, if we do think collectively that there is benefit in getting building going again and getting schemes up and running, then I think we're going to have some, you know, the risk profile for the average developer is different now than it was 2 or 3 months ago. If you look at how you go about building stuff is totally different. We're opening up our sites again at EcoWorld, and the measures that we have to put in place to get people onto sites, let alone get them to actually go about building stuff, means that it will cause quite significant delays and layer upon extra risks for those developers. And so I think it presents new challenges for the guys in our particular sphere, and whether the politicians really recognise that, or whether the politicians still are keen to chase significant amounts of affordable housing and all the various other benefits that development brings, is going to be a real test of everyone's appetite, I think, to how quickly we can get going again.
Out of interest, is there, you know, I think you touched on then about sort of sort of politicians' sort of agendas. Is there something you would like to see drop off that agenda to give some space for lessons learned or remedial action?
I think, is there anything that's worth dropping off? Probably not. I think it's going to be about flexibility. I think it's going to be about maybe trying to do this in a way that it allows flexibility as we go through the process. Basically, I think we were talking before we went live about the fact that, and I think that's exactly what Sue was touching on just now. We don't really know exactly what's going to come as a result of COVID-19. There's lots and lots of questions that we're all going to be asking ourselves, and we're all going to be talking to lots of people about. If we have to wait for all of those answers to come through, then we could end up waiting for quite some time. I think we have to accept that if we are going to want to see the industry get back up and running quickly, then we're going to have to introduce some flexibility into the planning process to allow us all to get that to happen. As a business, we're constantly looking at ways to improve the flexibility of our processes, because we need to be able to respond quickly to what's happening in front of us. Again, going back to opening the sites up, every week there's a new bit of guidance that comes from government about what you should or shouldn't be doing when you're opening up your site. So we're constantly trying to adapt to that. And I think the planning process, if there was one thing that could change, I think it is that flexibility, and to be a little bit more fleet of foot, to allow us to carry on going and to change as the world changes in front of us.
Okay, brilliant. Rozanna, what's your view of planners? What's their place in dealing with the post of COVID-19?
Well, I think all disciplines have a really important role to play. I completely agree with Sue that it's important that they're involved in the conversations at the outset. And I agree also with Matt that the market's facing incredible challenges. At the LLDC, we're also a planning authority as well as a landowner. And I think we found that conversations with the market, but also as a landowner, a very clear vision about what we want to achieve is really important. So it helps with those conversations with the market to be really clear what we want to deliver, but also that conversation has also been had with the politicians, whether they be the mayor, who we report to fundamentally, but also the local boroughs. We've got 4 host boroughs. So I think the conversations have got to continue. Planning does play a fundamental and important role. I think we're seeing that a lot of developers are focused in particular on securing planning during this particular time, whether it be outline or detailed. We also appreciate that there are challenges. There are many deadlines that the market is seeking to achieve, and that might not be the case in many places. So, we're spending a bit of time lobbying government to explore whether there's opportunity to extend planning deadlines so that we can keep planning permissions live, so that when developers get back on site, there's flexibility and opportunity. In terms of sort of flexibility and priorities, because that will be it's an ongoing conversation that as a planning authority on one side of the fence, but I myself as a developer also have to. Flexibility is key, and the local authority expressing their priorities is fundamentally important. We found on the Olympic Park, admittedly, we've got the benefit of billions of pounds of investment in the Olympic Park, the venues, and 102 hectares of open space. But investing in quality and investing in mixed communities has been fundamentally important to creating that place and this new piece of city and connecting the new with already established communities in East London. And I think we're seeing that, or certainly seeing now through the pandemic, we've kept the parkland open. It's been a fundamentally important resource to local communities, many of whom don't have gardens or balconies. And also the benefits of what we have achieved to date, and investing in quality, investing in sustainable neighbourhoods, is also driving value as well. So I think it's a conversation about cost, a conversation about priorities, but it's also a conversation about the value that good quality design, excellent planned neighbourhoods also delivers.
Hopefully we'll get time at the end, and I'll come back to that interesting point about sort of Stratford and LLDC, and that sort of sports city you've developed there, and whether we think that model is the way to go in light of all this as well. I'll try and make sure we come back to it. Pierre, as our voice and sort of expert on operations and live estates, is this question? Do you have something to ask on the planning's role?
On the planning role, I think it's just at the end of the day, you really need to develop for what the community wants and create a holistic environment. Because what we've realized now more than ever, being part of a community is more important before. And there is the mental health ramifications that COVID has proven. And really, if you don't build a community, you're making it harder to get through pandemics. And so we have a housing shortage here in the UK, and we need to figure out a way where the local authorities need to be reminded of this, and the supply of development is going to be less as a result of COVID-19. So how do we create a more efficient and timely approach in scheme approvals? And there needs to also be some more education. Some authorities do not fully understand the benefits of a build to rent, which is what we used to call multifamily in America, which has been around probably about 30 years over there. And there's a lot of benefits, and we want to make sure that the hurdles aren't unrealistic in getting schemes approved. Because at the end of the day, for a BTR scheme, any residential development, to be successful, we have to keep our stakeholders in mind. Because if you don't build something that is holistic and a true community, it's not going to be successful.
Okay, but again, similar to Rozanna, I'll come back to you, Pierre, because you've got the benefit of everyone else here has been sort of born and bred with the UK planning policy and the system. You're coming at this as a relatively sort of fresh sort of take on London and the UK. So I'll be interested to know how you think we can learn from other cities and other countries about how we tackle the same issue. To that end, I'll ask our second question. I'll pick on Matt this time to take our lead. Now, this comes from Pamela McLeod, who's a development manager at Pierre Property. Now, I think she picks on what I think a lot of people are feeling, and it's around our blue light workers. So her question is, the heroes of 2020 are typically those who are not served well by the housing market. Do you think we could see a return of the Homes for Heroes initiative that followed the end of the First World War? And what form do you think this could take? So Matt, I'll pick on you this, because no doubt no one could argue this is a fantastic idea and helping out our nurses and our delivery drivers and our mechanics and the likes. But is that commercially viable to a private developer? Can you afford to be so picky?
I think the challenge is going to be broader. I think everyone. I think the vast majority of the people I know will go out every Thursday and show their appreciation for the good work that everyone in the NHS specifically is doing. And I think COVID has shone a spotlight not only on the work that they do, but also how much they get paid to do what they do. And I think that's probably as much of an issue as anything, actually paying people a fair and decent wage. One of the challenges that coming out of COVID is, especially in the industry that I work in, people have been taking pay cuts and or furloughing, significant amounts of staff. And so coupled with the fact that I think mortgages are going to be harder to come by, because I think the banks are going to be slightly more cautious than they were previously. I think the overall affordability of homes is going to be challenged, right? It's going to be harder for us all to get a mortgage, and because we don't earn as much, and the banks aren't going to be as forthcoming with the debt. There was already a pretty big disconnect between house prices and earnings anyway. I think there's I think that issue is going to be there almost more so than it was before COVID-19. Whether you could come up with a specific measure that targets the people, a bit like the sort of Homes for Heroes initiative, I think, you know, that's eminently possible, and there's bound to be a mechanism that can facilitate that, be it a variation of shared ownership or some other mechanism that exists already. But I think that the point I'm trying to make is that I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on delivering affordable homes, regardless of who they're for, rather than picking a specific profile of person. I think it's going to be about trying to deliver as much affordable, genuinely affordable housing as possible. And if you do start trying to pick very specific cohorts to deliver that against, you might miss the wider picture. I think probably the conversation about especially NHS workers is, are they paid enough in the first place? I mean, if you resolve that, you begin to address whether or not they can afford houses in the first place, to be honest. But that's a bit above my pay grade, that particular conundrum.
We'll tackle that next week.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of other bigger issues, and I think just focusing on that particular one, we might end up missing the broader point, is my fear.
Well, Rozanna, as putting on that public sector sort of social developer sort of aspect, can other local authorities, housing providers, can they be more accommodating to this same group?
I think I do agree with Matt. I think we did have a concept a couple of years ago, this notion of key workers, and it's fallen out of favour. And it's fallen out of favour, I think, for the reasons that Matt outlined. You know, there are significant swathes of sort of our demographic who are struggling to access homes, irrespective of their employment, whether they work for the NHS or another sector. I think the focus will be more so on delivering more affordable homes and more of them. Because I think the national housing crisis, particularly through the pandemic, has emphasised really the divide and the challenges for many communities and many families. I think local authorities will, importantly, yes, have a significant role to play. I think we have lost the ability of local authorities to deliver more social housing and more affordable intermediate homes over many years. I think in recent years we were beginning to see a return of some of those local authorities beginning to operate and play in this piece. I think there will be a significant role for local authorities to do that. I think the challenge that there may well be is their capacity, their resources, and the funding to do so. So I think it's probably a joined up conversation with the private sector, the development sector, as well as the local authorities and the registered providers out there who obviously play a critically important role.
Okay. And Sue, from a planning perspective, is there merit in legislation to help out key workers, NHS workers and the likes?
I think just to start, I totally agree, and I think it was probably yourself, Nicholas, introducing that with the comment that the heroes of 2020 are typically those who are not served well by the housing market, and we need to think about that.
All credit to Pamela, actually. I was just reading her question.
It's an issue about quality, not just quantity. Quality both of the homes themselves And there I would certainly lay down the challenge that we look at some of our permitted development rights, where there's the opportunity for developers to convert offices into homes, and the result has been, not because they're not through planning control, the result of being units, and I call them that, not homes, that are 13 square meters in floor space, have no window, and those, what they do have, they have no natural ventilation. Now, what that must have been like for people who lived in this during the lockdown period, I can't imagine. It must have been horrendous. It's smaller than the space I've got round me now. And I think we have to tackle things like that. So it's about quality as well as quantity. We mustn't also lose sight of the standards and the recommendations of the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission, where we're talking not just about the homes themselves, but also about the built environment and the green space that surrounds those. And I think, Rozanna, you touched on in terms of the use of the parks in the Olympic Authority area. And there it is about how it all comes together. We can't just take pieces in isolation. And that, to me, is where a plan-led recovery really is something that we need to support, because that is the opportunity to bring together all the different elements and achieve something that works for everybody. Our places need to be places and homes that we enjoy all the week, not just at weekends when we're out of the building, but all the week, that we can live in, and that we can do so irrelevant of the age that we happen to be when we're occupying those places. So it's a bit of a sort of rambling answer, but I think it's actually it's more than just the question was about the homes. It's about the places and about the quality.
Okay. And Pierre, from your perspective, from a build to rent sort of developer's viewpoint, is there something that CA Ventures or your peers can be doing for key workers?
Yeah, it varies by scheme, because you want to hold developers and local authorities accountable on this. And we don't have any assets that are in London. All of them are in some stage of development right now. So, but in America, we have done things where we're working with the nurses, doctors, and even the employees that are there. So you don't have to have them commuting from home. We give them an apartment there where there is availability. I think there's a bigger picture here to touch on Sue's last comment is the homes really have to be made of quality, and in America as well as here, there's this drive to make these micro units because they make the models work on a per square foot basis. The smaller the unit, the more profitable it is, but you can't always put profit ahead of society. You're really going to see this move, and I think residents are going to demand it. They're going to want spaces that have storage. They want patios, they want balconies, they want a area where they can work, because as this work from home has a movement is now becoming more of a normal thing. I'm working right here in my bedroom because I don't have an extra space, and I think all those amenities are really going to be key in making quality homes. And whether it's an expensive home or a home that is cheaper, these are amenities that are needed. The green space where your kids can go out and run, the places for your dogs, and having an environment where you're really creating events to create a community, as well as these events going virtual. That way you can maintain the bond within community. And those quality of amenities and services are needed on all ends of the spectrum, period.
I think there's potentially something quite interesting in the build to rent model as well, though. I mean, what strikes me as one of the barriers to buying property at the moment is as much about the capital outlay that you need as much as the repayment element of a mortgage. So I think build to rent does offer a really interesting way to provide decent housing, good quality housing to a much broader audience. It will take us as a nation to get our heads around not owning property and being accepting that you'll have to rent it rather than own it. But if house prices are going to either fall or stagnate or not do anything particularly exciting for the foreseeable future, then I think more people will get their heads around rental rather than buying. And a lot of the build to rent, you know, as Pierre's saying, one of the things that I found fascinating about the build to rent model is you've always got to be on point, right? You're effectively selling every year. As soon as someone moves out, you've got to find someone else to take up that space. So it's not just about looking good in a brochure and then building it and walking away. You've got to be on point every year. And if your product doesn't meet what the market wants, then you suffer. It forces a different set of behaviours. So, you know, if policy can be more accommodating about build to rent and that attracts more decent operators into the market, I think that could be a way of opening up good housing to a broader church of people.
Okay, Matt, thank you very much for that. I was going to move on to our third question, but if I could just draw the panel's attention to the Q&A tab. Roy Fairgrieve has asked a question that's had quite a bit of positivity around it. And Rozanna, I'll ask you to answer this one for us first. Now Roy's asked, how should we progress with a sustainable greener footprint for new developments and incorporate the likes of MMC, 360 waste management, PropTech, mobilisation of a review, how we interact with built environment, air filtration, self-cleaning materials, space zone awareness, work-live units to habitat and sustainable alternatives to natural green space. And I think sort of, you know, Roy's question there is hit a trend in the questions that we were having submitted before. People when you're choosing to register is ultimately if there's going to be a winner from this, can the environment be that winner? Rozanna, do you mind if you tackle Roy's question first?
Yeah, it's quite a big question, Roy. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think this is also a huge area that we have to look at. Climate change is an incredible issue, and I think it's perhaps back to the sort of questions earlier about, you know, priorities and flexibility. I think, unfortunately, I think time's running out on flexibility, particularly in this space. And I think it's fundamentally important that the market responds in a really quite creative and innovative way to address all of these factors. I think there's been some significant policy shifts recently, you know, targeting zero carbon. Many of those policy shifts, unfortunately, don't match a lot of the, for example, the CCHP infrastructure that many schemes are now required to deliver, or indeed the way of calculating the outputs from those now dated heat and power sources is incredibly challenging. So there's a lot of work to do with policymakers, with government, and with local authorities, particularly on this green agenda. I think the work that we looked at on the park, we looked at delivering all of our homes to zero carbon, and we've managed to achieve a lot of that to date. I think, unfortunately, with Grenfell and the challenges with a lot of the insulation issues that arose from Grenfell, we've had to make some adjustments to that. So I think the market's innovating, things arise, and the market also is continuing to innovate.
Is it doing it at a fast enough pace?
I think there's a role to probably the market is being reasonably innovative, and I think having to be pacey with it. I think the building regulations and the changes to building regs are taking its time. So the market's observing policy shifts and policy moves and regulation shift and moves. And I don't think government is necessarily keeping track with some of that in innovation. So I think there's a lot to do. There's a lot more work to do. We're going to continue to try and do that on the park, as well as deliver 50% affordable, as well as manage and upkeep an incredible parkland and place. And we realise that's a lot to ask of our schemes and our developers, but we're in the fortunate position of owning the land, being the planning authority, being really clear about what we want. So it's a tricky one, but it's one that is up there, sitting alongside affordable. I think it's fundamentally important to do that. I don't have a clear answer to how, but I agree, it's really important.
Some of those things are going to have to change, though, aren't they? The space and zone awareness and work-live units. Because people are going to be working from home, we are going to have to adapt to that. And I think, for me, that's not going to be just about what happens within the four walls of the apartment, right? I mean, we were talking about one of the schemes that we have down in Woking the other day, and it's got lots of little spaces where you can go. And I think one of the challenges, on a personal level, I sort of wake up in the morning, come from my bedroom down into this room, finish, go and eat, go back into my bed. That just literally, I spend my life in two spaces at the moment, and it's getting a bit ridiculous. But being able to get out of this space and into somewhere else that is safe and you feel comfortable, I think we need to be cognizant of. I don't think the debate should just be about what happens within the four walls of an apartment. I think it's what happens within the development, and then what happens wider than that. And there's been lots of talk about, is this the end of city living? And again, I don't think that's the case either. There's different people who have different needs and wants out of the way that they live. If I was living in the middle of nowhere and not going to work, the chances of me ever actually speaking to anyone would be pretty slim, right? There was a big debate before COVID-19 about mental health and mental awareness and loneliness. That was becoming a big thing. Community. Talking about in community. So just this natural reaction that we all leave the cities and go and live in the middle of nowhere because we want the space. I can't see that happening. I think there'll be a group of people who are drawn into the city if there's space that they can get away from their apartment, but at least they're around other people. There's something just quite nice about being surrounded by people, even if you're not, going up and shaking their hands like you used to do. So
I completely agree with you, Matt. What I think he's describing there is like, you've got these communities where you've got you've been successful to create an alone together space that's a communal area where you sit and you can co-work with others, but you don't necessarily socialize with them. And now you have to address the mental health ramifications. So you're going to want to create a together alone space. And you're really going to have to modify design where people can now go down there and maybe in cubicles or whatever, where they've got a TV, a refreshment center, and they can talk to others and still feel connected, but they're in a more secure environment. And it's at EcoWorld, other developers, they offer this solution. And sustainability, I think this COVID-19 has been a dry run on the sustainability agenda, looking at your ESG policies. The range of the pandemic, it was known, and yet the crisis exposed a lack of adaptability and resilience among many companies. So we need to, I think one of Roy's comments was, how do we become greener? We can't only worry about the apartment itself, as Matt says. We have to look at other areas because the fossil fuels that we're using provide so much to the carbon footprint in a negative way right now. So we're looking at artificial intelligence to answer the prop tech comment, to combine that with sustainability. And artificial intelligence will manage the heating, ventilation, AC, and it can reduce the utility cost of the building by as much as 20%. So you've got reduced utility costs. The load on the electric capacity is less, and you've got a filtration system that is smart enough to know when it should change, it's going to be really prescriptive analytics as opposed to reactive. You have to address your boiler, you have to address your heating system in 2 months. If not, this is what happens, and running that from a dashboard. So I think the government as well as the private sector is going to have to work quickly, hand in hand together to address sustainability, because it's not going anywhere, and it's like that big elephant in the room. We need to address it.
And just to come back on that, I think Matt made some really, really good points, which we sort of were picked up again by Pierre. It's that we mustn't lose sight of the importance of sustainability or climate change, which were there before the pandemic and will be there afterwards. It's how we actually bring it all together and get something that works better and delivers what people want. Just something I did want to point out, that across the world, high density hasn't been associated with the greatest number of deaths from COVID-19, and low density equally is no guaranteed remedy. And I think we just need to step back and take this bigger picture view of things, weigh up, listen to all the views, listen to what people want, and try and put together a place that works. And Paris was already looking at a 15-minute neighbourhood. Is that the sort of concept that might be, picking up on what Matt said, might be something that we could explore? So I'm conscious of time, so I won't add any further on that.
So I'm not familiar with that 15-minute neighbourhood. Just give me the headlines of that.
It's just basically looking at how can you live within, get everything you want within that 15-minute sort of walk, move about. So it's effectively, you're fairly self-contained, but you can mix and effectively live your life without having to go beyond that boundary. And you will do, but it's the focus of what happens within a neighbourhood. So it's what makes a neighbourhood.
Right. Okay. Interesting. That sounds much more achievable in regional cities than London. I think 15 minutes is still probably pretty prime real estate, isn't it? But for Paris and London, that's interesting.
It's about how you focus and how you look at it. And when you're redeveloping, let's keep that sort of concept in mind, so you do get this place that works for all generations and all people. Okay.
Well, I'll go on to our fourth question here from Joanna Tatlow from Mace Development, Senior Development Manager. And she asks, will you be adapting the design of any of your residential developments in response to a potential move to more people working from home? And Pierre, I'll come to you to this first. So Joanna's asking, are you making any adaptations to your live estates in light of increased working from home?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think interior design will really start to show both real and implied barriers with common and public space, the use of those spaces. And there's going to be this new understood standard of 6 feet of separation, kind of the way 10,000 steps became a thing. It's going to be similar to that. And we're adding decorative furnishings and art pieces that allows for high design and openness, but also is going to create the implied barriers that the pandemic has created for us to expect, you know, as a society. Space design on current developments is a lot harder than new developments. On the new developments, the hallways, we're looking at that being wider. Adding communal space, because you're going to lose some of the usable space and the co-working spaces, because that's still very important. Larger lifts. I think an issue that was already existing here where the package rooms were too small, and they're always too small, and you need to have really big package rooms as well as the ability. A package room is where you can have Amazon deliver the packages, and whether it's in an actual box or a specific area, right. And then the resident gets a notification on their app, and they use that app to open the phone and get the package out. But refrigeration is also important. That way, if groceries are delivered, they can get that and any perishable items that may be delivered there. Faster bandwidth is key, because more people are going to be working from home. something that's taken off, which I'm sure EcoWorld has in their development, is like the virtual tours, virtual leasing, self tours, augmented reality to place your furniture. Hey, she left quickly. And something that's really interesting that we're looking at immediately with a partner is the smarter video cameras, because right now cameras don't do much besides just keeping an eye on things. But the smarter video cameras are going to allow for heat mapping and also allow you to know how many people are in an area. So if based on new social distancing standards, you've got 6 people maximum that can be in your fitness area, that camera will know, and then that will talk to your key fob, which is where you put your phone to enter the fitness center, and it'll automatically no longer let anyone enter the space because it knows that it's hit the maximum number of people in that space. And so we're experimenting with that on a couple of properties, and it allows your employees to really focus on giving customer service and building that holistic community, as opposed to having to constantly go to the fitness center and check to see if people are respecting the new social standards. We're kind of like creating the together alone spaces, creating smaller enclosed areas where residents have a large screen TV with a fridge, and they can talk to other people that are in similar situations, because what we've realized is that there's serious mental health ramifications from this, and we have to create more instances of togetherness to solve for this isolation. And as working becomes more popular, working from home becomes more popular, these private areas are going to address the need for residents to come down from their apartments to take a mental break. And something that I think a couple developers have done very well here is making sure that the health and wellness programs that they already had quickly went virtual to respect the separation. And having the ability to shift very quickly is important, because you're going to have these programs, whether it's for learning for kids, whether it's something new that you're learning, comedy hour, exercises. And quite truthfully, having a brand that resonates with the consumer right now is important, because consumers are going to remember the brand that was very proactive during this pandemic, and the ones that really were forward thinking in their approach. And we feel that prop tech is going to be a solution for many of those items, like the artificial intelligence to manage the heating, ventilation, AC, the smarter video cameras, and really getting to a point where you don't have to touch anything and just using the voice-enabled tech or your phone to open all amenity areas. So we're really excited to see where prop tech is going, because it's going to allow, I think, some winners in this are BTR as well as prop tech, because BTR provides the community, prop tech allows the solution.
All right, I will steal that, Pierre, and I'll use that another time. Rozanna, you mentioned about sort of the uniqueness of the Olympic sort of village parks. What you're doing at Stratford. Does that mean you've been pretty well set? Do you need to make any amendments now in regards to sort of working from home? Can you make amendments?
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Of course we can. I think we don't have the panacea on good ideas. I think, as I said at the outset, the approach we've taken is to, deliver outstanding quality, well planned and well resourced, sustainable community spaces. We've got outstanding parkland. We've got a number of venues, Olympic venues, to support and reopen again. And I think the spatial standards that we impose on our homes, generally larger than London plan standards, so as to ensure that there is that space for not necessarily home working as we envisaged back in 2008, but really more about space that people can move around. And Matt mentioned storage, I think access to open space, the balcony spaces and so on. So, you know, we approached it from the basis of, well, I'm sure we all live in well-connected, reasonably well-established communities and homes. You know, we need to look back at the past and what has worked. We need to look forward to the future and you know, learn those lessons. So I think, yes, we have still a lot of lessons to learn. I think Pierre's comments around prop tech and AI are really quite insightful. I think that's really where technology can help us hone and help us really, you know, make the most and eke the most out of good neighbourhoods.
And Matt, what about EcoWorld? Are you guys adapting designs? You know, adapting schemes that are on site at the moment in order to accommodate working from home, changing habits?
I think for us, it's less about adapting what is in construction at the moment, because there's a whole bunch of other challenges that we're facing on our construction sites at the moment. But like I was talking about that scheme that we were reviewing down in Woking, it is very much part of the review process. This is a different world in which we live, and that was the site I was talking about, where we're looking at the spaces that we have around the developments and just thinking, you know, rather than having lots of, you know, rather than having one big hub where residents might go, is there a way that we can spread that out so that you know, different people can feel comfortable in different spaces. You know, there's the sort of extroverts who'll be happy going into those big spaces full of lots of people, and they're probably not so worried about the social distancing aspect. And then there'll be the introverts who want to get out of their flat but want to go somewhere where it's not going to be surrounded by people. And trying to balance different people's needs on these developments, I think, is going to be the interesting thing going forward. And you know, you see all of that footage coming out of Italy of, well, and this, you know, in Italy they have someone playing a piano on a balcony, and in the States it's someone DJing on a balcony. But you know, the idea of using balconies as a sort of platform essentially to connect with people is something that we're looking at. So rather than having big screens between apartments and balconies, actually, you know, taking them down and giving people the opportunity to connect with the people that they live nearby or next to without feeling like they're on top of them. So yeah, I think we're constantly reviewing this and constantly changing, because otherwise, you know, we'll be left behind. This is a different world, and we need to adapt to that.
Well, on that note, I'm very conscious to give our panels a return back to their day jobs. So I'll say thank you very much to Pierre, Sue, Rozanna, and Matt for giving up your time for this. Thank you very much to our audience who've tuned in. And inevitably, we were never going to be able to answer all your questions. I had great fun reading through over the 200 questions you'd emailed in and trying to select just the 3 or 4 we were going to talk about today. But panel, if anyone would like to connect with you, are they free to do so using LinkedIn?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Perfect. No saying no now. And I'll thank you very much to Macdonald Company again for providing the platform for allowing us to do this. And listen, I can't wait to hear how our panel suggests the future cities are developing over the next coming weeks as well. So stay tuned and keep involved in these webinars as we continue to roll these out over the next couple of weeks as well. Thank you all again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Is that it then, Nick?
Momentarily, mate.